On August 6th, the Ukrainian army launched a surprise offensive into Russian territory of Kursk. Till now, they have captured around 1100 square kilometers of Russian territory. Prime Minister Carl Bildt, the former Prime Minister of Sweden, has said that this could be the turning point in the Ukraine-Russian war. President Joe Biden has said that this invasion has put President Putin in a tough spot. It appears that President Putin couldn't care less for this invasion because he is touring Azerbaijan, followed by his tour to Chechnya. Prime Minister Modi is traveling to Poland, followed by his visit to Ukraine. It was thought that Prime Minister Modi's visit to Ukraine could bring about some sort of a peace formula, because remember, President Zelensky had one point of time asked for Indian help for his peace formula. But then why would any country launch an offensive into another country if they had peace in mind? To put all these pieces into a semblance of sanity, we will be talking to Shri Kanwal Sibal, former Foreign Secretary of India. Namaskar and welcome to Samvad at Mind, sir. It's an honor having you.
My pleasure.
Sir, the Russia-Ukraine border was sort of militarily stabilized starting 2024. Not much was happening. Russia was trying to penetrate into Kharkiv. It was not succeeding as it might have desired to. Pokrovsk was a different story. They were on progress there. But suddenly, August 6th, and Volodymyr Zelensky makes a dash for Kursk. It has got a military significance for Russia, we all know, sir. So, having captured territory in Kursk, this is the biggest Ukrainian offensive into Russia. And Carl Bildt, the former PM of Sweden, has called the Kursk invasion as a turning point in the war and says that it has fundamentally changed the course of conflict in the political arena. President Joe Biden has said that the incursion has created a real dilemma for President Putin and put him in a tough spot. The Ukrainian offensive, the Ukrainian operations have been a signature move for President Putin also. And we can see that we might consider it as a setback, the loss of territory as a setback to President Putin. Now, your assessment, I would like to have your assessment on whether this is actually a turning point in the war and how tough is the situation for President Putin.
A few things. One, of course, don't believe Carl Bildt for a moment. He is viscerally opposed to Russia. When I was ambassador in Moscow, Carl Bildt was the foreign minister of Sweden. And I was aware of the position he was taking at that time. I'm talking about between 2004 and 2007. So he has this wishful thinking that somehow Russia can be either defeated or broken up, or its military power can be reduced. But long and short is that he's certainly not even remotely an objective observer of Russia. You know, he comes to the Rasina dialogue every year, and his single point agenda is to attack Russia. But that is one. The other is that Kursk certainly has symbolic value, because during the Second World War, apart from Stalingrad, which was a huge defensive victory for Russia, Kursk was a major offensive victory for Russia, because the biggest battle was in this area between the Soviet Union and Germany. And then when the Allies invaded Sicily, Hitler felt that the Italian regime may collapse. So he moved some divisions out of Kursk area into away from the Kursk area, and that was the beginning of the end of Nazi Germany militarily, insofar as Russia was concerned. From there on, the Russians knew that they are going to defeat Nazi Germany. So, with that kind of symbolism in mind, for these fellows to make an incursion into Kursk is symbolically to send a certain kind of message. And certainly it is embarrassing for the Kremlin and for Putin, because they didn't expect that to happen. Remember, the border between Russia and Ukraine is so long, is not manned. Every inch of it is not manned. So if the Ukrainians thought that they should make an incursion and, as they say, have something in their hand when peace negotiations start in order to bargain with Russia, they could do that. Number two. Number three, Putin has not been flustered at all by what is happening, even though it's embarrassing for him. The operations in the Donetsk area continue. He just visited Azerbaijan, and now he's in Chechnya today. There is no, I mean, if you are facing such a serious problem on the frontier, then you don't go and make a foreign visit or what have you. Number three, Russia will throw these fellows out. Because purely in the military sense, apart from the symbolic aspect of it, most people are agreed that it doesn't make any strategic sense. And eventually they'll be pushed out. Though they have not been pushed out immediately, and therefore it gives an impression as if they are succeeding on the ground a little bit. They have also suffered heavy casualties, and these are their elite forces. A lot of equipment seems to have been destroyed. Finally, as I understand from sources that I find well informed and credible, that even on the Ukrainian side, they understand that militarily it doesn't make sense. But the operation is directed at the internal situation in Ukraine, where Zelensky and Yermak are the people who are key in terms of this decision making, and they want to, and they're afraid that a new Maidan kind of a thing can happen in Ukraine, and they want to guard against that and give the impression that they are not only in control, but they're active and they're snatching a little bit of a victory. So it's more directed at safeguarding their internal position and fearing that there could be a oligarch engineered movement to oust them. So to guard against that, this has been done. So in other words, the motivation behind is internal politics rather than any serious military planning in terms of securing ground durably on Russian territory and using it as a bargaining chip. And also, I think the idea also is to send a message to the world that we are not finished, because generally speaking, everybody is getting tired of this. Their biggest operation is certainly not this. The biggest operation was when they tried to break through Donetsk and reach the Black Sea and cut Donetsk in two, which didn't succeed. That so-called counter that they had planned for, I think, last year, which miserably failed. So, the idea is to try and mobilize the flagging support in Europe and the West by saying that we're still capable of doing things, support us more, give us more weaponry, give us more F-16, give us more of this, give us more of that. That is part of the equation too. So to answer your question, I don't think you should take Carl Bildt seriously. And Biden, in any case, for him, you know, if Zelensky or Ukraine was to be actually defeated on the ground, what legacy will Biden leave behind? As it is, his presidency is over.
Hmm.
And tomorrow, if Trump wins, I don't know if he does or not, and there's a different US policy, then what will be Biden's legacy? Failure. So he cannot at all take the position that or acknowledge that his policy is failing. So therefore, he'll keep supporting and saying the kind of things that you are saying, that you've attributed to him.
So you spoke of the Madons out of a suspicion, again, internally Ukrainian internal situation. Is the banning of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church related to that?
Well, he's been targeting the Ukrainian Orthodox Church for a long time. He's been arresting their priests, whatever they're called, not metropolitans, and their hierarchy, because they're linked, they were linked to the Russian Orthodox Church, and they are Russian speaking. So they have looked upon them as internal saboteurs and who are linked to Russia. And, you know, there are people who in Ukraine as in Russia today, who are believers. And so they see the the Ukrainian Orthodox Church as a vehicle for Russia to keep control over the minds of the populace. Now, don't forget that the people in Western Ukraine who are actually behind all that is happening, the overthrow of Yanukovych and all this Nazi business and Bandera, they're all from the West, into Poland. They're Catholics, so they would then have a certain view of the Orthodox Church, not as believers, but as Catholics. So maybe that is also an element in the situation. But I am waiting to see the American reaction, and that of the US Commission for International Religious Freedoms. After all, you know, they criticize right, left, and center on minor issues and produce these damaging reports year after year and try to designate us as a country of concern. Let's see how much principled they are, and talk about banning of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. It's a shame.
Well, we know how neutral they are, sir, obviously. So
No, they are not. But the point is that if they have certain principles about religious freedom, then these principles are being violated. Do they have the courage to say this about the Zelensky government?
We'll wait and watch that, sir. Sir, you spoke of the tiredness in Western capitals. I have this survey which was done by the Global Affairs, which is the part of American political risk consultancy Eurasian Group, which showed that 94% of the Americans and 88% of Western Europeans were in favor of advocating for a negotiated settlement with Ukraine. Even the Ukrainians are showing a higher number towards a negotiated settlement. Zelensky had started talking of inviting Russia to the peace summit in Switzerland. So what explains this offensive? I mean, I'm trying to understand the goals behind this offensive, the political and the diplomatic goals of Zelensky.
First of all, this whole peace offensive by Ukraine is a bit of an eyewash, not serious at all. After all, if Ukraine was, and the backers were interested in a negotiated solution, there were two opportunities to do that. One was the Minsk agreements, which became a document adopted by the UN Security Council, including the United States of America and all the permanent members. But as you know, 7 years passed and Minsk agreements were not implemented. Then after Russia moved into Ukraine, you had the Turkish mediation and Belarus, and there was some agreement in principle. In fact, the document was initialed, and now it is alleged, more than alleged, that Johnson, the Prime Minister of Britain, then flew to Kiev and persuaded Zelensky to walk back, which he did. Now, And then he come forward with a 10-point peace plan, which is totally impractical because it talks about war crimes being punished and Russia retreating from every part of Ukraine and this and that. It is not something which is realistic. But there is this effort by the West, United States and Europe, to try and project Zelensky more positively internationally, especially in the global south, that he's looking for peace. And they roped in Switzerland to organize this so-called peace conference based on Zelensky's plan, and there were effort to rope us in at the highest level, whether Prime Minister or Foreign Minister level. Ultimately, we sent our Secretary West to this meeting. For the Russians, it was a non-starter right from the start, and logically so. If you want to have a peace conference, then the two protagonists have to be there. So you can't have one side which is backed by the West and NATO with their own agenda, outlining what should be the basis for the peace. And then what do? Ask the Russians, look, this is our plan, you have to implement it. It's a kind of an ultimatum. If you defeat Russia and Russia surrenders, like Germany and Japan did, then you can impose peace on them. So the whole thing was a bit of a charade, and we, of course, attended rightly, but at an official level, and then we didn't sign the joint. We were not a party of the communique that was issued. So I don't take that peace plan seriously. Ultimately, Putin is quite right in saying, Russia is quite right in saying that if there has to be a peace, then the Americans have to decide whether they want peace or not. The key is in their hands. And so long as the Americans still believe that Russia has to be militarily defeated, has to be isolated, they're imposing more and more sanctions, they're giving more and more lethal arms. Now they're given F-16s. So if they follow the strategy that the way to peace is to arm Ukraine more and achieve military success on the ground in order to force Russia onto the negotiating table, there cannot really be any serious peace moves. Serious peace moves have to be preceded by de-escalation. And in this context, you went to ask me that question, I'm a bit concerned that just before Prime Minister's visit, which was a bold move by us to Ukraine, they launched this Kursk offensive. While we are talking about dialogue and diplomacy, they are escalating. And then they expect India to back, or the United States also expects India to give more rope to Zelensky and engage with him. But if they're really interested, they should have taken a step backwards rather than a step forward.
So, sir, I was going to come to this question about the PM's visit to Ukraine and Poland. So he's traveling to Poland today, and from there he's going to Ukraine. So initially, Zelensky spoke of India's help in the peace formula, as he called it. And then he expressed disappointment when Modi hugged Putin during his visit to Moscow in July just this month, a month ago. So does peace have any chance in the region? And because Putin has already said that what is there to even talk about with them after the incursion? So can India hope of offering a peace formula which is acceptable to both the parties? Do we really have a chance?
No. Although Prime Minister in his tweet said that he will share with the Ukrainians perspectives on a peaceful resolution on the conflict, which suggests that he has some ideas in mind. Now, as a diplomatic gambit, it's all right. We are positioning ourselves as a country that can talk to all sides, sides which are adversarial to each other, and that we are in favor of dialogue and peace. And if we talked about dialogue and peace in Moscow, we can talk about dialogue and peace in Ukraine. But when it comes to the specifics of the way forward, that's a very complicated affair. If the if the Ukrainian side has the position that there is no question of any territorial compromise, that is their position. Plus, Zelensky passed a decree that so long as Putin is in power in Russia, there can't be any negotiations with Russia. Now, if there was an interest in genuinely looking for peace, then maybe this decree could be withdrawn in order to convey the message that they are now willing to talk to Russia, even if Putin is in power, and suggest that, or let it be known, not formally, that they are willing to look at territorial compromises, but the extent of which can be negotiated, but it's not a rigid position that Russia has to withdraw from Donetsk and even from Crimea. And then they cannot at the same time, as we mentioned earlier, launch a military operation in the Kursk area and send drones even towards Moscow, as they have done yesterday, or whatever. It's not serious. And I come back to what I said, that as I understand from good source, but of course, at the end of the day, I haven't heard it from Zelensky or Yermak himself, that the whole operation is being done in order to manage domestic politics rather than anything else.
Sir, Putin has been using this nuclear Armageddon sort of a threat, using tactical nuclear weapons. So to induce a slow yes sort of a policy from the West, where they were supplying weapons to the Ukrainians, but at such a rate that just they were able to defend themselves and not go on the offensive. Now with F-16s coming in, the Americans giving them the go-ahead to launch attacks with their weapons into Russian territory, and US, Netherlands, everybody joining in. Denmark, they're supplying F-16s to Ukraine. Do you see the possibility of the conflict escalating?
Yes, certainly. It can. Now, this reminds me of the years of lectures we received before we became nuclear and after we became nuclear, about how people like us in South Asia were incapable of handling the complexities of nuclear weapon in our arsenals. There's only these countries, the Western countries, know how to manage the tensions that arise from possession of nuclear weapons. They have a whole, plans with stages of escalation and stuff like that, and all that vocabulary that went with it, counter force and this and that and that. And here you have a situation where the two biggest nuclear powers in the world, by far, compared to anybody else, are in confrontation with each other, with one side saying quite openly that we want the strategic military defeat of Russia. Now, a strategic military defeat of Russia, so long as Russia possesses nuclear weapons, is impossible to conceive. The nuclear doctrine of all countries is that if there is an existential threat, we will use nuclear weapons. So why is the West assuming that they can impose a strategic military defeat on Russia and cause a regime change and there'll be no reaction? So they are playing with fire, and irresponsibly so. So I don't blame the Russians. Russians are warning them time and again that don't play with fire, don't keep escalating to the point that we are left with no choice. But Putin has been saying at the same time that I don't need to use nuclear weapons and I have no plans to use them. But he is signaling that we have the capacity to deter you from crossing the reddest of red lines. where you challenge the existential existence of Russia itself. Because although officially it has not been said, but there are a lot of people who say that the West, that Russia needs to be broken up. That just as the Soviet Union was broken up, Russia has about 100 nationalities, and it should be broken up too. The Ukrainians say that openly. The Polish president says that openly. That Kallas woman, now has become the head of foreign policy of the European Union, says that openly. So, if as against this, Putin talks about Russia possessing nuclear weapons, I don't think morally he is more at fault than anybody else. And in fact, I would say that with America walking out of the INF Treaty, placing weapons of their anti-ballistic missile system, which actually are dual use, can be converted into offensive missiles in Poland and in Romania. They have enhanced the nuclear threat to Russia. And the Russians have been saying that F-16s can carry nuclear bombs. So whether actually they are fitted, the F-16s that have been given, I don't think they would be fitted with the nuclear bomb carrying capacity. But nevertheless, there's no clarification on this. So if you supply them this kind of weaponry, then you're poisoning the atmosphere to such an extent in the nuclear domain that there's loose talk about tactical use of tactical nuclear weapons or things like that. I would frankly blame the Americans and the West far more than the Russians on this. Actually, why do countries have nuclear weapons at the end of the day? Eventually, it's meant for use in some cataclysmic situation. Otherwise, why have them? Otherwise, then you have a nuclear weapon-free world because they have no use, because they'll never be used, and they can't be used. No, but you have them because for contingency where actually your existence is at stake and you don't want to be blackmailed, and you want to tell the other side that if you try and blackmail us, then we have the capacity to counter you. So the fact that Russia and the United States are the biggest nuclear powers in the world, and now they are not only fighting a proxy war, but in effect a direct war, because if the US president says openly, I want to strategically defeat you, what does this mean?
I believe Putin has given a sneak peek into his mind in his autobiography, First Person, where he writes a story about a rat which has been driven into a corner suddenly becomes very big and counter-aggressive. So, I mean, he has given a sneak peek into his mind as to what he exactly thinks and what he can do. And I'm not sure whether the US or the West understands him properly. Coming back to the US at the presidential elections, because the US is an active partner in the whole conflict, despite not being there physically. So, does Zelensky have what should I say, an eye on the US presidential elections also? Because Kamala Harris is quite pro-Zelensky, very openly pro-Zelensky, whereas Trump and Putin have a relation which is not a secret anymore. So, is this land grab just for the sake of negotiations coming later on?
If the land grab was to become not permanent but durable, then it's a strategy which from the Ukrainian point of view may make some sense, but it's not going to be durable. There is no question. So I don't know. As I said, therefore, because it doesn't make any sense in terms of a military operation, it has to be guided by some other considerations, and therefore I come back to what I said earlier, that it is more to prevent the overthrow of Zelensky and Yermak. They are the two key people in the entire Ukrainian establishment. And Zelensky now is on a difficult constitutional wicket because he's postponed elections. Therefore his legitimacy as the leader of Ukraine is also questionable. It's not constitutional. So it's more, if one was to believe the information that has been shared with me, if it is really meant as a life-saving operation internally, then what you are saying in terms of using it as a bargaining chip in the future wouldn't make sense. But coming back to Kamala Harris and Trump, I don't think one should take Trump very seriously. You're right in one sense that Trump has said that if I am president, if I were president, this war won't have occurred, and I can solve this in a minute or something like that, he said. But that is Trump being impulsive. It's not as simple as that. How would he end it? First of all, is he going to bludgeon Ukraine into saying that you give up all the territory that Russia has in its possession? What means does he have? Will Europe accept that? The Baltic states, Poland, UK, France now, they are saying it's an existential threat to Europe in the future. They have to protect the security of the future generations. If Russia succeeds in Ukraine, then Putin is an imperialist. He wants to recreate the Soviet Union and Soviet power, and he will then attack the democracies in Europe. Even Germany is saying that. Even the German chancellor says that. And in some other context, I asked the question, well, Germany has no contiguous borders with Russia, so how will Russia take and invade Germany? They'll first have to invade the intervening countries. So it's just propaganda. It's just propaganda. And so far as Trump is concerned, he's also been boasting in the past that I'm the president who imposed the most sanctions on Russia. And he did impose sanctions on Russia. So I won't say that one should take at face value what Trump says. It will not be easy for him to find a solution which he thinks is. And the other thing is, assuming for a moment that he found some solution, and Russia agreed to the solution, and the next US president abandons whatever agreement has been reached, as was the case with the nuclear agreement with Iran. Trump walked out of it. So the next US president can walk out of any. So what are the absolutely inviolable guarantees that Russia would demand and insist that the international community backs them? And will Trump be able to accept that? Will NATO accept that? Will Europe accept that? Does he want the collapse? People say he's not wedded to NATO. Does he want the NATO to collapse? It's not going to be that easy. So I don't take it at face value, though, mind you, he'll be less of a warmonger than Biden has been, or Kamala Harris would be.
So one final question before we conclude. The postponing of elections, banning of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, the proliferation of the Azov battalions, the so-called Nazification of Ukraine, banning of media houses, banning of political parties, and still a Democrat. Seriously?
Yeah, because India is not a democracy, no? Ukraine is. Because India would become a democracy if it did all these things, and then they'll say, yes, you're a democracy. It's sheer hypocrisy and double standards of the West. The game is not Ukraine-Russia. The game is United States and Russia and NATO. Ukraine is just a pawn. As it is, most of Ukraine's resources are now owned by the Americans, including companies, including their agricultural land. And you must have heard Lindsey Graham the other day. Absolutely atrocious things about the Kursk operation. And earlier on, either he or somebody else
Blumenthal,
said that.
Richard Blumenthal.
No. Earlier on, he or somebody said that Ukraine is sitting on huge amounts of natural resources, and we don't want Russia to get hold of them. It's too vital. We must get hold of them. So I think it was Lindsey Graham or there's some other senator who said that. So there it is. I mean, the issue is not really Ukraine as such. Ukraine is the issue is the resurrection, possible resurrection of Russia as a power, and see, and a very interesting thing also. On the one hand, if you look at the discourse, they say, oh, Russia has been weakened. It has lost 80% of its weapons, that Soviet weapons. They can't produce. Now they're changing the discourse a little bit, but they've been taking chips out of their washing machines in order to put them in their military equipment. They went to Iran to help them. They went to North Korea to help them. In other words, painting a picture of a weak Russia that finds it very difficult to defend itself. And then the other discourse is, no, it's a terrible country. It's imperial. It's going to walk into West Europe. Then make up your mind that if it is a country which is weak and on the verge of defeat and can be defeated, or is such a powerful country that you have to do everything to prevent it from realizing its imperial ambitions and walking into Western Europe. So it's propaganda.
Sir, I'd like to conclude on that note. Thank you so much for sparing time for us, and we'll keep coming back to you for further discussions on these issues. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Namaskar.